is Will from the St. Johns County Public Library System, and it's that time of year we're into everything spooky. And it makes sense. Halloween's at the end of the month, and I think a lot of us like to stretch out that celebration as much as possible. And one of the ways we do that is we watch horror movies. Horror movie genre is one of my favorite genres. I especially love B horror movies and the ridiculous nature of them. So it doesn't need to be scary necessarily to be enjoyable. Depends on what you're looking for. So because there's literally thousands of horror movie titles to choose from, I decided to focus on one decade, the 1980s. So I chose the 1980s primarily because I'm biased. These are the ones that I grew up watching, but they also are ones that have spawned franchises that directors and filmmakers are starting to remake today, for better or for worse. There's some argument there within the community, and they stand out for different reasons. This is not an all-encompassing list of the top horror movies that came out of the 80s. I made sure to pick ones that I knew for sure were in our system. So if you were interested, it'd be easy for you to pick up. So we're going to go in chronological order. That was the easiest way for me to break this up. And let's just jump right into it. Moving on to 1984, we're sticking with the Stephen King theme. This one was a short story that, for better or worse, was adapted into a feature-length film that spawned many sequels as well. Children of the Corn. It's about a couple who are driving out to Seattle, and they end up needing help in Nebraska, and the only town they can find is Gatlin. But to their surprise, there's no adults around. It's run by children who are under the influence of Isaac and Malachi and He Who Walks Behind the Rose. If you haven't seen it and you're into Stephen King movies, watch it. I would not recommend watching the sequels. I've seen them, or most of them. They're completely ridiculous. But if you want a good laugh, I would watch this. This did not hold up very well. But if you notice, it has Linda Hamilton in it. Linda Hamilton, if you've seen Terminator, you know who she is. The cool thing about horror movies and sometimes B-horror movies is they can launch career of actors. I mean, even Leah Thompson and Dennis Quaid were in Jaws 3. And where I love Jaws 3, it's not at all the best movie ever, at all. Like, at all. All right. Still in 1984, and we have a Wes Craven entry. Nightmare on Elm Street. And speaking of actors or actresses who find success with a horror movie, there's a very, very young Johnny Depp in here. Nightmare on Elm Street tells a story about a killer who can kill you in your dreams. I'm sure most are familiar with this, but it does bring to light what would happen if you couldn't fall asleep or felt safe falling asleep when you start questioning reality. This has spawned lots of sequels as well. We just had Friday the 13th. There's a Freddy and Jason movie. Robert Englund, this is his most iconic role as Freddy Krueger. So if you're at all into Wes Craven or iconic horror movies, you can't leave out Nightmare on Elm Street. At least the original. It's up to you whether or not you want to watch the sequels. Sticking with 1984, we have another Steven Spielberg pick, and this time he partnered with Joe Dante, the man who directed The Howling, to make Gremlins. This is a little bit more lighthearted than some of our other picks. It is labeled as a horror comedy. It's slapstick comedy. It's still horror though, even though it's PG and I know Gizmo is cute. It's not really a kid's movie, even though it kind of looks like it. It's not scary, but if you have little guys or kids who are easily frightened, it might be a little bit too much for them. Gizmo's adorable, but it tells a story about what happens when you don't follow the rules with Gizmo. What happens if you get him wet and you feed him after midnight. The Gremlins are mischievous little creatures that cause all kinds of chaos. There is a sequel. Sequel's not as good in my opinion, but it does bring Gizmo back if you love the little guy. So If you want something a little bit more lighthearted, that's not quite as scary, pick up Gremlins. Moving on to 1987 with the Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell pick, and if you recognize those names, you know where I'm going. Evil Dead 2. I picked the second one because we don't actually own the first one, but the second one is basically a remake of the first one on a bigger budget, and this is where Ash gets his chainsaw hand. And if you're at all familiar with the Evil Dead series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These are definitely cult classics. They are B movies. They're ridiculous, but they spawned a sequel. They spawned some comic books. Stars relaunched it as a TV series. Ash vs. the Evil Dead, I think it ran for 3 seasons. There was actually a remake of the Evil Dead, I guess maybe it's about 6 years ago now. It might be longer. I didn't really like the remake because they took it a little too seriously, if that makes sense. If you see these, you know what I'm talking about. These are meant to be, in a way, ridiculous. If you like zombie movies, you gotta watch The Evil Dead. Just, these are ridiculous. They're not my favorite, but I know a lot of people love these. Like I said, they're a cult classic. And if you're into zombie movies and you like Bruce Campbell, he has definitely embraced his B actor status. Check him out. So now we move on to 1988. And speaking of cult classic and ridiculous horror movies, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. The original title for this was supposed to be Killer Clowns, but the makers didn't want people to think it was a slasher film, so they added the From Outer Space part. This is billed as a comedy horror. It's completely ridiculous. The popcorn gun in here was the most expensive prop. And if you've seen this, you know what I'm talking about. It's very hokey, very slapstick, very tongue-in-cheek. It is meant to be ridiculous. And they've been working on a sequel for years now. And I guess it was in the works, but when Disney bought Fox, 21st Century Fox, Disney cut that project. So I don't know if someone else is going to pick it up or not. We'll see. I'll be honest, I'm kind of surprised anyone was willing to entertain a sequel to this. It is about killer clowns from outer space that live in a circus tent, UFO, and feed on people. So, again, if you like horrible B movies, this is the movie for you. There's no judgment here. I like my own fair share of B movies. That one scared me as a kid, and watching as an adult, I'm like, that's ridiculous, because I watched all kinds of horror movies as a kid, but that one is the one that freaked me out. Probably because of the clowns. The clowns in there are kind of creepy. Keeping with the year 1988, we are going to go over another origin movie for a successful franchise. It just spawned a remake last year, I think it's 2019, where Mark Hamill plays the voice of the title character. Child's Play. The original Child's Play tells the story of a serial killer who transfers his soul into a good guy doll in order to keep from being killed by the police. And he is trying to get revenge on those who wronged him, I should say. And realizing later that he could be stuck in this doll, he then aims to transfer his soul into the lead child character, Andy. This movie goes some weird places. It's very much an 80s movie. It spawned several sequels. You have the Chucky sequels, and like I said, the most recent remake. The remake is different, very different. So if you've seen the remake, the most recent one, but not the original, they're completely different movies. About the only thing in common they have is there's the mom, Andy, and a doll named Chucky. They're very different, though. And for those of you unaware, they definitely took the good guy doll idea from popular doll toys in the 80s. There was the My Buddies and Kid Sisters. I don't know how many people remember those, but I remember wanting a My Buddy. And if you look at the pictures of those and then how they made the good guy dolls for Child's Play, they're pretty similar. The size is the same and just the materials they use. So that was kind of creepy. I remember not liking Child's Play as a kid because of the doll, but I could watch it okay now. And our last pick from 1989, another Stephen King edition that also has spawned a sequel, Pet Sematary. I enjoyed the first one better than the most recent remake. The remake was good, don't get me wrong, but they told the story differently. I know Stephen King was involved in this Pet Sematary. I'm not sure how involved he was in the remake, and I'm not sure which one follows the book more closely. This tells the story of a town. A doctor moves his family to this town to become the local university doctor. And there's a pet cemetery on the property where all the kids whose animals have died buried in this pet cemetery. Beyond this pet cemetery is another cemetery that if you bury it, it comes back, but it's not the same thing you buried. And the father is introduced to this cemetery when his daughter loses their cat. It's all about decision making and how far you're going to go to keep something alive, even at the cost of that thing not being the thing you remember, if that makes sense. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to give anything away. The acting in this is okay at best. You know, it's not going to win any awards, but it has the man who played Herman Munster from the Munsters, and I loved that show as a kid, so I was excited when I saw that he was in here as a kid. The actor that plays Gage, I think his name's Miko Hughes, he's like two and a half at the time. Great toddler actor, really. His character has to play two different people, basically, and I did a great job with it. So if you're into Stephen King movies, you're into 80s horror movies, even if they're kind of hokey, you gotta watch that one. If you've seen the remake, definitely go back and watch the original. There is a sequel, I believe, but I haven't seen that one. And those are the movies I have for you. I'm sure I've missed some titles, and if I did and you think it should be included, pop in the comments below. I love to talk about horror movies with people. Like I said, it's one of my favorite genres. I love things like Halloween Horror Nights and stuff like that. So I hope you consider checking out some of these titles or looking at some of the other horror titles we have in the system. We have lots, and we also have lots of, horror genre fiction as well. We have Stephen King books. We have in nonfiction true crime. This can be scarier because it's based off of real cases, right? So I hope that you consider looking into our catalog for some of these, and I hope your October is as spooky or not spooky as you want it to be, and have a great day. Bye.